Thank you. I want to start by thanking our hosts, especially Naomi and Ludmila, who've been Naomi for this conference, which has been a really wonderful experience, and Ludmila, who's been a friend of Nazarbayev University for a couple of years now. And our cooperations with the University of Arizona have been really meaningful and are starting to grow into something special. So I'll get into my talk. Actually, I think this is about, oh, I've got this control, don't I? It's about the third slide.
It's the white one.
It's the white one.
So you should turn this one on.
I think I'm blind.
Let's turn it on. That's okay.
Here's the new batteries.
There we go. It was just turned off.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Much worse. Okay, so there we go. So before I get going, I'll follow up. Andre had said that I'm a little bit neither fish nor fowl around here. My academic background is neither Russia nor the modern world, and so even taking Naomi's suggestion that we should rethink those categories and think expansively, I really don't fit in. But by a series of very unlikely events, I have had a front row seat for the last several years at Kazakhstan's sort of set of modern social programs, social engineering programs, and in particular in terms of the orientation of Kazakhstan as a nation towards the West, towards Russia, towards the Muslim world. And so I want to share today probably a slightly less academic paper than what we've seen for the rest of the day. Some of my observations about what Kazakhstan is doing right now, as in today, and a few reflections on what that means. So I think we can think of this as something like applied ethnography. So where do I start? So the Kazakhstan, since being thrust into independence in 1991, has sought to maintain close relationships with Russia, well, as of course it's had for many centuries, while forging new alliances as an independent, globalizing nation. The approach the Republic has taken has drawn great attention around the world due to its success in creating strong relations with the major powers, including many nations that are at odds with one another while being positively inclined towards Kazakhstan. The approach known as multivectorism, multivector foreign policy, multivector diplomacy, has earned Kazakhstan a great reputation within the diplomatic world, and it's brought this Central Asian Republic into playing a key role in negotiating international crises, this summer actually being the site of negotiations for the Syrian peace talks, such as they went. In addition to the cultural capital that's obviously come from this for Kazakhstan, and the obvious benefit of opening up world markets economically, which has benefited Kazakhstan enormously for commodity exports, which is important as part of the project to seek a spot in the top 30 most developed nations, this strategy is also just absolutely one of necessity. It ensures security, it ensures stability. Being placed between the dragon and the bear, as they like to say, Kazakhstan feels the tug of Russia's historic relationships pulling against the counter tug of China's ever-growing economic center of gravity and the nation's own Asian identity that pulls it eastward. Kazakhstanis tend to be keenly aware of this tug of war and that it represents a genuine security threat. So therefore, keeping the strong positive relationship not only with Russia, but also with China, and also then with the EU, the US, and the major Middle Eastern powers, is a strategy of necessary shelter. It's not a subtle element in the strategy. Kazakhstan has formal military arrangements for cooperation, for interoperability with Russia, the other Central Asian states, NATO, the United States in Operation Steppe Eagle, China and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and others. So a set of military alliances that really are not seen in very many places. Anyway, this military strategy isn't really the focus of what I'm talking about today, but it has been the most visible element of Kazakhstan's attempts to orient itself as what you might think of as a global team player rather than a member of any traditional alliance. So while that gets a lot of attention, there have been a number of parallel internal programs as well designed to create similar global perspective within Kazakhstani culture, within Kazakhstani society, within the mentality, as they like to say, although I really dislike that word because I'm not sure it means anything, but particularly this is happening within the area of higher education. Now, the most notable program in this vein is the Bolashak program, which some of you may be familiar with. Bolashak was really a visionary program. In 1993, at a time when Kazakhstan hadn't come into being yet, and it really wasn't obvious that Kazakhstan would be the Central Asian power. Really, Uzbekistan should have emerged as the center of gravity for Central Asia. A time when Kazakhstan was not yet a successful petrol state, when the wealth was developing but not insured, President Nazarbayev made the really shocking decision to set aside an enormous chunk of national wealth to send students to other countries for education. The idea was that the very best students within Kazakhstan could go abroad, earn degrees within very specific, strategically important areas from the best universities, and bring those back to Kazakhstan. It was clearly an investment in the future. Kazakhstan's higher education system at that point was entirely Soviet in construction. Global expertise was clearly needed to drive the country forward, but it was also a very effective strategy in bringing the experience, foreign language, cultures, and really a global orientation into the nation's young elite. The Bolashak students naturally created networks within their host countries and affinities, and today, 23 years later, Bolashak students really run much of Kazakhstan, and it's known today as being very important. It's a beloved program within Kazakhstan, I think. So more recently, unfortunately, it is reducing in size now. I think is a terrible decision, but Bolashak is being dismantled. And what's coming after it, sort of the closest family member to the Bolashak program, is my university, because university, Andrei's university and Valentina's university, Nazarbayev University. This is a much more recent program. So the Nazarbayev and the Republic have increased focus on programs that are designed to position Kazakhstani society as a cosmopolitan, global-oriented country with many allies but few allegiances. And this is a clear example of this. So this set of projects nominally intended to modernize the country, and the point that I'm trying to make is that it's largely also about orientation towards Russia, orientation towards the Muslim world. Okay, so Nazarbayev University, we're the closest relative to the Bolashak program, soon to be its successor after it's been completely dismantled. Our university, as a quick background, as an idea, it was established in 2009, got an enormous chunk of funding from the Republic. We consume something like 20% of the higher education budget for the entire Republic, and it's a country with 120 universities, so it's very disproportionate. It shows the enthusiasm with which the government is approaching higher education. I don't mean that as sarcastically as it sounds, just a little bit. So it opened in 2010 for preparatory studies. The university has a preparatory school to get students prepared for entering the university. 2011, we opened 4 undergraduate programs. 2011 is when I arrived in Kazakhstan to teach anthropology, and then, well, lots of things happened after that. Previous attempts have been made to create universities, international universities within Kazakhstan. They've been plagued by a number of factors. There are some good universities happening, Eurasian National University, Kazakh Humanities and Law University, but previous examples were plagued by challenges boiling down to funding, academic freedom, and a lack of real international staffing where it counts. So Nazarbayev University, to be blunt, our success is yet to become certain. We've had some successes. We're very proud of our students who are now attending universities like the University of Arizona and doing very well. But still things like funding and political protection for academic freedom are ultimately subject to an enormous amount of political will from the head of state specifically. And right now we have that. The future is the future. But we have been established, our university, on a foundation that is different from other universities in some very key ways. I don't really remember what I have here for slides. Good. Most importantly, our university was established on a foundation of autonomy that is radically different than anything that's happened in Kazakhstan before, or as far as I know, anywhere else in Central Asia. The single most important of our foundation is a set of laws that establish the university as autonomous from the most inhibiting elements of Kazakhstan's regulatory system. There's a law entitled On the Status of Nazarbayev University, Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools, and the Nazarbayev Fund. I can talk about those other ones over coffee if you want. So this is the title of the law, the status of our university. It was passed in 2011, and it creates a firewall around Nazarbayev University. What it does is it removes the Ministry of Education completely from our operations. We do not respond to the Ministry of Education. We do not follow state curriculum. They don't have the right to audit us. They don't have the right to punish us. Really, they don't have the right to do anything relative to Nazarbayev University. Instead of the ministry and its various committees and institutes, Nazarbayev University is governed by a board of trustees. Should sound very familiar. And in turn, that board answers to a supreme board of trustees that has been established to look something like a national school board. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, I will point out that the chairman of the board of trustees is the prime minister, and the chairman of the supreme board is the president. So it's not as if we are completely free of the republic of regulation. Although, you know, most states have state school boards or state regions for land grant universities, so it's not totally foreign. Okay, and they have, I will say, they've provided us some really surprising levels of protection for academic freedom so far, but it raises questions for long-term independence. In addition to these boards, Nazarbayev University was established on a model that leverages partnerships with international universities to mentor, consult, and occasionally provide educational content to each structural unit. In establishing the university in this way, the intention is, what we've done is to create something that, again, I think is really unique in the world of higher education. So we've moved away from the branch campus model that China and some other countries have used, where they pay, for example, New York University to come establish a campus, run operations, and it is New York University. We're also not doing what some of the Middle Eastern petrol states are doing, which is simply to buy a name, get somebody to say, okay, you can be Arizona and Kazakhstan, we slap the name on and do whatever we want, and you run the risk. Instead, what we're doing, and we're also, there's the Abu Dhabi's Education City, which is really fascinating. If you've been there, it's a food court, basically. They provide tax incentives and space, and universities rent it, and it's profit-driven. It's really cool, actually, from just a purely capitalist perspective. So instead what we've got is, for the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, our strategic partner is the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Other strategic partners at NU are Cambridge, Penn, Duke, National University of Singapore, Pittsburgh for the medical school. So we've chosen top 30 universities, and they are consultants. They're on the phone 2 or 3 times a week. I'm on Skype with somebody at Madison talking about, here's a problem we've got, our regents don't understand this, what can you give me advice for? They've helped us to design our curricula, they help us with external hiring to make sure that there's no nepotism involved. So it really is a partnership. At the end of the day, what we're doing is not reproducing. We have a lot of conversations about, is this a Singaporean university, is it a Japanese university, is it American, is it British? And ultimately what we're trying to do is to be a Kazakhstani university using the best of both worlds. Anyway, so this is great. We have partnerships with Arizona. If you want to come study with us in the summer, please come see us. Okay. Now, additional to this, there's a high school version of this as well, the Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools. I don't have time to talk about it. If that's interesting to you, I'll be happy to. Hey, look, there's a picture of our atrium. See, we have palm trees too. We recently gained, the one thing on that slide, we recently gained a positive evaluation from the European University Association, which we're very proud of. Okay. So outside of that, much more recently, President Nazarbayev, and actually Vika started talking about this, Nazarbayev has addressed the nation in a speech on the Third Modernization of Kazakhstan. The address calls for the Kazakhstani people to focus efforts on developing the social and cultural elements of life as they have been doing with political, which is his idea of the first modernization, and economic life for the past 25 years. So he's got this interesting sequential view that, okay, we provide a political foundation, economic foundation, now culture can suddenly throw a switch and become modern. The address itself is vague, as they tend to be at many points, but it does represent some very specific calls to action that really, in my mind, are based on an understanding of history that is incredibly sophisticated for really any political leader, but particularly a Central Asian authoritarian leader like Nazarbayev. His understanding, well, the understanding of history represented in the speech that he read is very sophisticated. He's calling on the nation to increase their own understanding of history and culture, but in departing from more familiar nationalisms, the first thing he does is to publicly include non-Kazakh Kazakhstanis. So this is a nation of people who are here. and then he kind of slides back to it, but it's still the Kazakh nation, but it's a very delicate balance. Then he goes on to accept that history includes unpleasantness. Where do I have this here? So he's calling for all these things. Oh, actually, before I go on, the last thing here, Vika started to mention this. One of the interesting bits of, well, actually, no, I'll come back to that later. There's the names of it in Russian and Kazakh. So he calls on the people to cast aside things that are unpleasant. And so these quotes are from the Third Modernization address, which are very interesting. So we've got to have links to our history, but this does not mean conservation of everything in the national consciousness, something that give us confidence in the future, some things drag us back. Modernization means that a number of archaic habits should be left behind. So this part of the address has led to some fascinating conversations at the government and sub-government level. And this is a little bit of what I want to chat about today. I also want to note there's a line in here that is the best thing I've ever read in a Kazakhstani document. It says in the speech, Kazakhstan does not need mere engineers, and then goes on to say what we need are people who understand and lists all the humanities and social science disciplines, which in a university that sometimes talks about itself in a STEM orientation, I've been a little bit happy about this. Okay, that quote ends up in everything I write for the next 2 years. So the Third Modernization address itself has set off this flurry of activity, largely following these quotes, within the government, education, culture, and policy circles within Kazakhstan. A number of think tanks, institutes, commissions have popped up within the last 12 months to guide, actually within the last 6 months, to guide and advise the government and culture and various bodies on implementation of these ideas. And the existing groups have also taken up this address as a list of specific tasks to undertake. So my best impression of this, really as an outsider, is that this was a nice speech and a nice article that somebody wrote for that Nazarbayev presented to the Republic, and it got extremely strong positive feedback. And so now he's sort of called to the policy bodies and said, figure out how to make it real. Now we suddenly have to do something with this. So there are these organizations. The Institute for Eurasian Integration is one that has popped up that has strong ties to Nazarbayev University. It's funded by and answers directly to the presidential administration. They've been holding workshops. They're putting together a volume. They've got committees, all sorts of things, talking about how do we do this, right? What did he mean by Third Modernization? How do we get it in practice? They're also working on constitutional reforms, by the way, that are amazing, moving towards a full parliamentary system that could be very interesting. At a recent conference hosted by this organization, the Institute for Eurasian Integration, a think tank funded and directed by the president, I saw lots of interesting things. The morning session was dedicated to the general question of Kazakhstan as a vision for globalization. What does it mean to be global for Kazakhstan? The range of approaches was perhaps not entirely surprising. A hardline nationalist calling for a strengthening of patriotism among Kazakhstani children so the world will become aware of the beauty and power of Kazakh, not Kazakhstani, culture. And inevitably the world then will adopt Kazakh culture. Right? This is followed by a practical economic approach, considering how to enter global markets via better English, business etiquette, technology, internet, blockchain, all of the buzzwords that we can string together. A historian considers all of the ways that this has been tried and failed in the past, right? We know how academics can be pessimists. But to me, the most interesting part of this was a woman named Oktore Rayamkulova, who's the Vice Minister of Culture and Sport. And she took the most pragmatic approach to this question I could possibly have seen, was simply asking, what does the world want in a country that they aren't getting now? It was a branding approach. What is the open niche that is in the global sort of socio-cultural market, and how can Kazakhstan become that? Very interesting. I don't have time to go into it, but what stands out in all these conversations is that there's this very reflective, very self-aware interest in becoming something new, right? In becoming part of something bigger, a willingness, an eagerness to adapt to the world, to join the global community. I may be over-exaggerating. I can get excited. A couple of my students in the room, you can ask them. This isn't some sort of an unprincipled surrender to the global forces of global uniformity. We're not all neoliberals now. But it does indicate that the Kazakhstani intelligentsia is ready to position itself within the global sphere, however best serves the ambitions of blending into the world and maintaining positive relations with countries, right? So again, we're back to the question really in these conversations comes down to how do we do this in a way that balances Russia, the United States, China, and the Muslim identity of the Kazakh people. It's been a fascinating set of things. A specific mandate within another specific mandate, and I'm just going to read through a couple of these and try to move on. Branding Kazakhstan, here we are, what should we be? Another very specific mandate that's getting a lot of interesting attention right now is a shift in orthography, okay, from for the Kazakh language into a Latin script. The program is fascinating in the range of explanations that have been proposed. We've been talking to the government organizations, we've been talking to the IEI, also looking at the more public conversations about this. And it's been variously explained to me that this will make Kazakh easier to learn, not for foreigners, but for Kazakh children. It will be easier to learn because there are fewer letters in the Latin alphabet, by 3. It has been also explained to me that it will make written Kazakh language closer to the spoken phonetics. Of course, you look at a sound like ch, and we're talking about 4-letter combinations to get there. Maybe, maybe not. Thinking about the different number of vowels in Kazakh. It's more efficient simply because there are fewer letters. We have a limited supply of letters. It's been explained that this is a return to previous script, right? Which is true, although it's also not a return to Arabic, which comes before Latin. It's been pointed out that nearly all other Turkic languages have already shifted. Okay, that makes sense to me. So it brings the Turkic nations closer together. And very high on the list is always that it makes it easier to code software in Kazakh because coding is done with a Latin script. So those explanations always rush to indicate that, of course, this is not a shift away from Russian. Oh no, just because we're moving away from Cyrillic, we're not moving away from Russian. Russian does remain one of the primary languages of government, and of course it will always be written in Cyrillic, always. The Russian culture and literature are very near and dear to Kazakhstanis. This is all very true. It's the only, as the government will have you know, that this is the modern thing to do. This to me is one of the most clear examples of a pivot really away from Russia. I'm not a Slavicist, I'm not a Turkicist, Turkologist, whatever they call themselves. Maybe I'm missing something, but it's hard for me to see any explanation here aside from an orientation away from Russia towards the West. Right? Actually, recently, the government official who designed, this is the orthography that they've just announced this week, he was talking to our students at NU, and he explained to us that it's not just Latin, it's the English version of Latin because it is the most advanced version of Latin because there are no diacritics. But they have added these apostrophes, and this is a meme I took off of Facebook yesterday. Our students were having none of it. This has provoked a very strong backlash. People were on the fence about Latinization, but the apostrophe seems to be the straw that is going to break the proverbial camel's back. You can see how long and awkward looking. This is a very aesthetic thing, but these words are not so pretty. Okay, I'm not going to go into great depth because it's been a long day, and I'm just going to ramble if I do. But I'll mention that there are a set of internal. The last orientation that I want to point at is there's an inward orientation. So actually, my academic background is in North American Indian studies. So here in Arizona, I'm aware that Pueblo cultures have a number of directions aside from the 4 cardinal or the 8 cardinal and semi-cardinal. The southern Pueblos have up and down as well. And is it Zoom? One of the Pueblos has also in as one of the cardinal directions. And I think of this as the cardinal direction in. So the Kazakhstan has a number of internal, really more than quasi, just nationalist programs to make sure that these programs are balanced with a focus on a strong root of Kazakh and Kazakhstani culture. One of the biggest here is the Sacred Geography program. This is specifically called for in the address on the Third Modernization. And this basically calls for 100 most sacred sites to be identified, protected, developer tourism, and put into a hagiography that can be taught to all of the students and all of the people around the world. It's fascinating. They've employed ethnographers to understand how people in different parts of the country use sacred sites, to understand sort of the meaning of them, etc. It's been really fun to watch this. Oh, and the last thing I'll say, just because I was going to mention it earlier and I deviated from it. So the names, so in English and in Russian, this is the modernization of the social consciousness. I'm not very good with Russian, to be honest. In Kazakh, this is spiritual, refreshing, renewal, something like this. It is again, so the approach to this that involves the Kazakh side of the house, the Kazakh side of Kazakhstani culture, is about spiritual renewal. It's a much less economic, it's a much less sort of neoliberal approach, and a much more nationalist and spiritual approach. Trilingualism we've heard about a little bit today. I did like this quote. Again, Nazarbayev in his address understands, and he has this conversation within the Third Modernization speech with people who he can hear in his own ear saying, we don't need to learn English because it will dilute Kazakh. And I think this is a very modern view. He says, this is very argumentative, but he says, do you really think that 40 million citizens of the European Union do not respect native German, French, Spanish, Italian just because they're speaking English? Again, it's fascinating. Okay. Anyway, so the point I want to make is that Kazakhstan is famous for its political, military, and diplomatic efforts to balance the major powers of the world. It's done a good job. I'm not really a cheerleader for Kazakhstan's government, although it might sound like I am today, but in that area I think you have to give them credit. And I see this suite of educational, orthographic, cultural reforms as trying to basically create a sort of public conscience, a consciousness that is the same thing, to ensure that people don't feel too tightly tied to Russia. Don't give up Russia, don't give up the Turkic or the Muslim world. China is just a factor, it doesn't have to be dealt with in any proactive way, but especially with the orthography, it's about making sure that Kazakhs sort of grow up, and Kazakhstanis, with a sense of affiliation, maybe not filial association, but affiliation with the West, and specifically with the United States. So, thank you very much.